The requisition officer looked up from his clipboard with barely concealed irritation. "You want what exactly, Lieutenant Ramirez?" His voice carried just enough volume that the three other personnel in the armory stopped their conversations to listen. She repeated her request calmly, specifying the exact rifle model, scope configuration, and ammunition load she needed for the upcoming operation. The sergeant behind the counter snorted softly and shook his head. "That is some serious hardware you're asking for there. You sure you can handle something with that much kick?" Two junior officers near the equipment lockers exchanged glances. One leaned toward his companion and whispered just loud enough to be overheard. $20 says she changes her mind once she feels the recoil on that thing. The other nodded with a knowing smirk. "I will take that bet. Most people request something lighter after their first shot with equipment like that." Lieutenant Ramirez maintained her professional composure as she waited for the requisition officer to process her request. The morning light filtering through the armory windows cast long shadows across the rows of weapons, creating an atmosphere thick with skepticism and barely suppressed amusement from the gathered personnel. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar situations where someone was underestimated in your community. The requisition officer tapped his pen against the counter rhythmically. "Look, Lieutenant, I have been doing this for 15 years. That rifle configuration you're requesting, it has about a 40% accuracy rate even among our most experienced marksmen." He paused deliberately, letting the statistic hang in the air. "Are you absolutely certain you would not prefer something more, manageable for someone at your experience level?" A master sergeant who had been reviewing inventory sheets looked up from his work. He studied her for a moment, then addressed the requisition officer directly. "Maybe we should start her with something from the standard issue rack first. Work her way up to the specialized equipment once she proves she can handle the basics." His tone suggested this was less a suggestion and more a recommendation born from watching too many overconfident personnel make requests beyond their capabilities. The junior officers near the lockers had grown bolder in their commentary. The first one spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have seen guys with 10 years of sniper training struggle with that setup. What makes her think she can handle it right out of the gate?" His companion nodded in agreement. "Probably saw in a movie somewhere and thought it looked cool. That is usually how these special requests start." Lieutenant Ramirez stood quietly as the discussion continued around her, her expression remaining neutral despite the increasingly pointed nature of the comments. The armory had grown crowded as word spread that someone was making an unusual equipment request, and several more personnel had drifted over to observe what was clearly becoming an entertainment for them. The requisition officer finally looked back at her directly. "Tell you what, Lieutenant, why don't we compromise here? I can set you up with something that will still give you good range and accuracy, but maybe something that will not knock you flat on your back the first time you pull the trigger." He gestured toward a different section of weapons. "We have some excellent options that might be more appropriate for your, shall we say, developing skill level." One of the observers, a corporal with multiple deployment patches on his uniform, decided to join the conversation. "Lieutenant, no disrespect intended, but that weapon system you're requesting has a learning curve steeper than most people expect. Even our best shooters needed months to get comfortable with its characteristics." He crossed his arms and leaned against a nearby cabinet. "Maybe start with something that will not bruise your shoulder for a week and work your way up from there." The atmosphere in the armory had shifted from routine equipment distribution to something resembling a public consultation about her qualifications. More personnel continued to gather, drawn by the unusual nature of her request and the increasingly vocal skepticism from those already present. A staff sergeant who had been quietly organizing ammunition supplies finally spoke up. "You know, Lieutenant, there is no shame in recognizing your limitations. Better to choose equipment you can actually use effectively than to struggle with something designed for specialists." His words carried the weight of someone who had seen overconfidence lead to operational failures. The requisition officer was already reaching for a different form. "How about I put you down for something more standard issue? Something that will not require specialized training or months of practice to use properly." He paused with his pen hovering over the paperwork. Unless you have some background with advanced marksmanship systems, that is not showing up in your file here. Lieutenant Ramirez finally spoke again, her voice steady and professional. I would like to proceed with my original request, sir. The simplicity of her response seemed to catch the gathered personnel off guard, as if they had expected her to accept their recommendations and modify her equipment needs based on their collective assessment of her capabilities. The requisition officer set down his pen with a deliberate click that echoed through the increasingly crowded armory. Lieutenant, I need you to understand something here. He gestured toward the weapons rack behind him where the requested rifle system hung among other specialized equipment. That particular setup has sent 3 experienced shooters to medical in the past 6 months. Separated shoulders, severe bruising, 1 case of temporary hearing loss despite proper protection. These are not rookies we're talking about. A senior chief petty officer who had been observing from the doorway stepped forward. His weathered face bore the kind of expression that suggested he had witnessed too many overconfident personnel make costly mistakes. Lieutenant Ramirez, is it? He consulted a tablet briefly. I do not see any advanced marksmanship schools in your training record. No specialized sniper courses. No long-range precision programs. He looked up with raised eyebrows. What exactly makes you think you are ready for equipment that challenges people with years of specialized training? The growing audience of personnel had formed a loose semicircle around the requisition counter. A gunnery sergeant near the back spoke up with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. That weapon system requires upper body strength. Most people do not possess naturally. The recoil management alone takes months to master properly. He crossed his arms and studied her carefully. No offense intended, but you do not exactly look like someone who has been preparing for that kind of physical demand. One of the junior officers from earlier decided to elaborate on his earlier skepticism. Look, Lieutenant, we have all seen people get excited about high-end equipment they saw in training videos or heard about from other units. But there's a big difference between wanting something and actually being able to use it effectively in the field. His companion nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Better to be honest about capabilities now than to discover limitations when it actually matters. The master sergeant who had suggested starting with standard equipment moved closer to the counter. Lieutenant, let me share something with you from experience. I have been in situations where personnel insisted on equipment beyond their skill level, and it never ends well. Either they cannot perform when the moment comes, or worse, they endanger themselves and others trying to use systems they have not mastered. He paused to let his words register. Is that really a risk you want to take? A weapons specialist who had been conducting inventory in the background approached the group. She carried herself with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with every piece of equipment in the armory. Lieutenant, that rifle configuration you requested, it requires specific breathing techniques, advanced trigger control, and compensatory adjustments most people never learn. She gestured toward the weapon in question. Even if you could handle the physical aspects, the technical expertise needed to use it effectively takes years to develop. The requisition officer picked up his clipboard again and flipped through several pages. According to your service record, your last qualification was with standard issue equipment 6 months ago. Scores were adequate, but nothing that would indicate readiness for advanced systems. He looked up with what might have been genuine concern. Are you certain you would not prefer to schedule some additional training time before making equipment requests of this magnitude? The staff sergeant organizing ammunition supplies had stopped his work entirely to focus on the unfolding situation. Lieutenant, I have to ask, is there some specific reason you feel you need this particular setup? Some mission requirement that would not be satisfied by more conventional equipment? Because if this is about wanting to stand out or prove something, there are safer ways to demonstrate capability than requesting gear designed for specialists. A lieutenant colonel who had been passing through the armory paused near the entrance when he noticed the crowd. His presence immediately elevated the formality of the discussion, and several junior personnel straightened their postures noticeably. What seems to be the situation here? The requisition officer quickly briefed him on the equipment request and the ongoing discussion about its appropriateness. The lieutenant colonel studied Lieutenant Ramirez for a long moment before speaking. Soldier, advanced marksmanship systems are not toys or status symbols. They are precision instruments that require dedication, training, and physical conditioning to use properly. He gestured toward the gathered personnel. These people are not trying to discourage you out of malice. They're trying to prevent you from making a mistake that could have serious consequences. The weapons specialist decided to provide additional technical details. That scope system alone requires training most people never receive. The ranging calculations, wind compensation, and ballistic adjustments are not intuitive. Even experienced marksmen struggle with a learning curve. She looked directly at Lieutenant Ramirez. Without proper preparation, you would be setting yourself up for failure and potentially damaging expensive equipment in the process. One of the observers, a master chief with impressive decorations on his uniform, offered what seemed like helpful advice. Lieutenant, there is no shame in building your skills progressively. Start with intermediate systems, demonstrate proficiency, then advance to more challenging equipment. That is how professionals develop expertise rather than jumping straight to the most difficult level. The requisition officer was now holding a different form entirely. Look, Lieutenant, I'm going to strongly recommend we start you with something more appropriate to your current qualification level. Something that will allow you to develop proper fundamentals before moving to advanced systems. He clicked his pen expectantly. This is really the most responsible approach for everyone involved. The atmosphere in the armory had become thick with collective certainty that Lieutenant Ramirez was making a request far beyond her capabilities. The personnel present seemed united in their assessment that her insistence on advanced equipment demonstrated either dangerous overconfidence or fundamental misunderstanding of her own skill level. The lieutenant colonel prepared to render what appeared to be a final judgment on the matter. Lieutenant Ramirez, based on the discussion here and review of your qualifications, I am inclined to support the recommendation for more appropriate equipment selection. Unless you have additional information that would change this assessment, I suggest you reconsider your request. The lieutenant colonel's assessment seemed to settle the matter for most of the personnel present, but Lieutenant Ramirez remained standing at the counter with unwavering composure. Her silence in the face of mounting institutional pressure began to draw more curious onlookers from throughout the facility. Word was spreading that someone was making an equipment request so far beyond their apparent qualifications that it had drawn the attention of senior officers. A master gunnery sergeant approached the group with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to resolving problematic situations. He carried a tablet displaying what appeared to be training records and qualification scores. Lieutenant, I took the liberty of pulling your complete service history while this discussion was ongoing. He scrolled through several screens before looking up with a puzzled expression. Your marksmanship scores show competency with standard weapons, but nothing that would indicate readiness for the system you are requesting. In fact, your last advanced training was basic rifle marksmanship 3 years ago. The weapons specialist who had provided technical details earlier decided to offer additional context. That particular rifle configuration has a documented failure rate of 67% among first-time users. By failure, I mean complete inability to achieve target acquisition at ranges beyond 500 meters. She gestured toward the weapon with obvious familiarity. Even those who manage basic proficiency typically require 6 months of intensive training before achieving operational effectiveness. A chief warrant officer who specialized in marksmanship instruction had joined the growing assembly. His presence carried the weight of someone who had personally trained hundreds of personnel on advanced weapon systems. Lieutenant Ramirez, I have been teaching precision shooting for 12 years. In my experience, personnel who request equipment significantly above their documented skill level usually have unrealistic expectations about their capabilities. He paused to study her carefully. What specific training or experience makes you believe you can succeed where others with superior qualifications have struggled? The requisition officer had been consulting with the lieutenant colonel quietly while the technical discussions continued. He returned to the counter with obvious reluctance to continue processing a request that had generated such widespread concern. Lieutenant, I need to inform you that requests for specialized equipment typically require approval from your commanding officer when they exceed normal qualification parameters. He held up a form requiring additional signatures. Are you prepared to have your unit commander review and justify this equipment selection? One of the junior officers who had been observing since the beginning decided to share what he considered helpful perspective. Lieutenant, maybe this is about proving something to yourself or others, but equipment is not the way to do that. Real marksmanship comes from training, practice, and gradual skill development. He exchanged glances with his companion. Jumping straight to advanced systems usually ends with embarrassment and potentially dangerous situations. The Master Chief, with extensive decorations, spoke up again with the authority of someone whose opinions carried significant weight. Lieutenant, I have seen this scenario before. Promising personnel who think the right equipment will transform their capabilities overnight. It never works that way. Expertise is earned through progressive challenges and consistent training, not by acquiring the most advanced gear available. A ballistics expert who had been reviewing technical specifications approached the counter. That weapon system generates muzzle velocity and chamber pressure that require specific physical conditioning to manage safely. The recoil pattern alone can cause injury to unprepared shooters. He consulted his notes briefly. Based on standard physical conditioning requirements, most personnel need at least 4 months of preparatory training before attempting to use this system operationally. The staff sergeant who had been organizing supplies earlier decided to offer what he considered practical advice. Lieutenant, there is absolutely no shame in building your skills systematically. Start with intermediate precision systems, demonstrate consistent performance, then advance to more challenging equipment. That is how professionals develop genuine expertise rather than risking failure with equipment beyond their current capabilities. The lieutenant colonel had been consulting with other senior personnel who had gathered to observe the unusual situation. He returned to address Lieutenant Ramirez directly. Soldier, this discussion has raised serious concerns about the appropriateness of your equipment request. Multiple technical experts and experienced instructors have expressed reservations about your readiness for this system. He gestured toward the assembled personnel. These are not casual opinions, but professional assessments based on documented standards and safety protocols. A senior enlisted advisor who had remained quiet during most of the discussion finally decided to contribute his perspective. Lieutenant, I have been in the military for 23 years. I have seen confident personnel make equipment requests that seemed reasonable to them, but were clearly inappropriate to experienced observers. The pattern is always the same: initial insistence, eventual failure, and sometimes injury or damage to equipment. He looked directly at her. Is that really the outcome you want for your career? The weapons specialist provided additional technical information that seemed to reinforce the collective assessment. That scope system requires understanding of atmospheric conditions, target movement prediction, and advanced ballistic calculations. Most specialized marksmen spend months learning to use it effectively, even with extensive training support. She gestured toward the equipment. Without that foundation, you would essentially be guessing at adjustments that require precise knowledge and experience. The requisition officer was now holding multiple forms and appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Lieutenant, I'm going to need explicit authorization from your chain of command before I can approve this request. The technical concerns raised here, combined with your qualification history, make this a decision that needs to be made at levels above my authority. He set the paperwork aside. Unless you have additional information about your background that would address these concerns, I recommend reconsidering your equipment needs. The growing assembly of personnel had created an atmosphere where Lieutenant Ramirez appeared increasingly isolated in her insistence on equipment that every expert present considered inappropriate for her documented skill level. Their collective expertise and genuine concern for her safety had transformed the initial skepticism into institutional consensus that her request demonstrated dangerous overconfidence. The lieutenant colonel prepared to offer what seemed like a final opportunity for her to reconsider. Lieutenant Ramirez, given the unanimous technical assessment and safety concerns expressed here, I'm strongly recommending that you modify your equipment request to something more appropriate to your current qualifications. This is not about limiting your potential, but about ensuring your safety and operational effectiveness. The lieutenant colonel's recommendation seemed to crystallize the collective opinion, but rather than ending the discussion, it appeared to energize additional personnel to contribute their expertise. A ranged safety officer who had been monitoring from the administrative office approached with a clipboard containing incident reports and safety documentation. His expression carried the weight of someone who had witnessed too many preventable accidents. Lieutenant, I feel obligated to share some statistics that might influence your decision. Over the past 18 months, that specific weapon configuration has been involved in 7 safety incidents during qualification attempts. 3 shoulder separations, 2 cases of scope eye from improper positioning, and 2 instances of equipment damage from inexperienced handling. He flipped through several pages of documentation. Every single incident involved personnel who believed they were ready for advanced systems without adequate preparation. A master sergeant instructor from the marksmanship training facility had arrived after hearing about the unusual equipment request. His reputation for developing precision shooters was well known throughout the installation, and his presence immediately commanded attention from everyone present. Lieutenant Ramirez, I have personally trained over 400 personnel on advanced weapon systems during my career. He gestured toward the requested rifle with obvious familiarity. That particular setup represents the absolute pinnacle of precision rifle technology. Even my most gifted students require minimum 12 weeks of intensive instruction before attempting operational use. The conversation had attracted a gunnery sergeant who specialized in equipment maintenance and repair. He carried a tablet displaying maintenance records and cost data that seemed relevant to the ongoing discussion. Lieutenant, that weapon system cost the military $47,000 per unit. The scope alone is worth more than most people earn in 6 months. He scrolled through several screens of data. When inexperienced personnel attempt to use equipment beyond their skill level, the repair costs alone can exceed $10,000 per incident. One of the junior officers decided to offer additional perspective based on recent observations. Lieutenant, just last month we had a staff sergeant with 8 years of military experience request similar equipment. Guy had excellent scores with standard weapons and seemed confident about his capabilities. He looked around the group for confirmation before continuing. First day on the range with advanced equipment, he could not hit a target at 300 meters. Spent 2 weeks trying to qualify and never came close to minimum standards. The weapons specialist who had provided earlier technical details returned with additional documentation. She carried printouts showing qualification requirements and performance standards that seemed directly relevant to the discussion. Lieutenant, the minimum qualification standard for this weapon system requires consistent accuracy at distances up to 1,000 meters in various weather conditions. She consulted her papers briefly. Current military records show only 12% of personnel achieve qualifying scores on their first attempt, even after completing prerequisite training programs. A chief petty officer who had been observing quietly decided to share experiences from his previous assignments. I just transferred here from a specialized training facility where we worked exclusively with advanced marksmanship systems. The washout rate for personnel attempting to qualify on equipment like what you are requesting exceeds 70%. He paused to let the statistic register. These are not people lacking motivation or basic skills. These are experienced military personnel who discovered that advanced equipment requires capabilities they had not yet developed. The requisition officer had been consulting with his supervisor while the technical discussions continued around the counter. He returned with additional forms and what appeared to be official policy documentation. Lieutenant, I need to inform you that requests for equipment exceeding normal qualification parameters now require completion of a liability waiver and assumption of responsibility for any damage or injury resulting from inappropriate use. He held up several pages of legal documentation. Are you prepared to accept personal financial responsibility for equipment worth nearly $50,000? The Master Gunnery Sergeant, who had reviewed her service records earlier, decided to provide additional context about training requirements. Lieutenant, achieving proficiency with advanced precision systems typically requires specialized instruction that costs the military approximately $15,000 per student. He consulted his tablet again. Current training schedules show availability for advanced marksmanship programs starting in approximately 8 months. Would it not be more practical to complete proper preparation before requesting specialized equipment? A senior enlisted advisor who had remained quiet during most of the discussion finally decided to contribute his assessment based on decades of military experience. Lieutenant, I have witnessed this exact scenario dozens of times throughout my career. Confident personnel who believe equipment will compensate for lack of specialized training. The outcome is always the same: failure, embarrassment, and sometimes injury. He looked directly at her with obvious concern. Your persistence in the face of unanimous expert opinion suggests you may not fully understand the gap between your current capabilities and the requirements for this equipment. The ballistics expert returned with additional technical specifications that seemed to reinforce the collective assessment of inappropriateness. That weapon system generates recoil energy equivalent to being struck by a 40-pound weight moving at 15 miles per hour. The muzzle blast produces sound levels that can cause permanent hearing damage without specialized protection. He gestured toward the rifle with obvious respect for its power. Physical conditioning requirements alone eliminate most personnel from consideration for training programs. The lieutenant colonel had been consulting with other senior officers who had gathered to observe what had become an institutional consultation about equipment appropriateness. He returned to address Lieutenant Ramirez with what appeared to be growing frustration about her continued insistence. Soldier, we now have unanimous technical assessment from multiple experts, documented safety concerns, significant financial liability, and clear training deficiencies. Every professional standard indicates this request is inappropriate and potentially dangerous. The weapons specialist decided to offer one final technical detail that seemed to summarize the collective concern. Lieutenant, that rifle requires hand-loaded ammunition with precise powder charges and bullet weights. The ballistic calculations alone require mathematical skills most people never develop. Even if you could physically handle the weapon, the technical knowledge needed to use it effectively represents years of specialized education. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed from initial skepticism to institutional certainty that Lieutenant Ramirez was demonstrating dangerous overconfidence that could result in injury, equipment damage, and operational failure. The assembled expertise represented decades of combined experience with advanced weapon systems, and their unanimous assessment created overwhelming pressure for her to modify her request. The requisition officer prepared to make what seemed like a final attempt to resolve the situation appropriately. Lieutenant Ramirez, given the comprehensive technical assessment, safety concerns, financial liability, and training requirements discussed here, I'm going to need you to either provide documentation of specialized qualifications not currently in your record, or modify your equipment request to something appropriate to your documented skill level. The comprehensive technical assessment had created an atmosphere of institutional finality, yet Lieutenant Ramirez maintained her position at the counter with the same calm professionalism she had displayed from the beginning. Her unwavering composure in the face of mounting expert opposition began to generate whispered conversations among the assembled personnel about her apparent inability to recognize the gravity of their collective concerns. A colonel from the Base Operations Center arrived after receiving reports about an equipment request that had generated unusual attention from multiple departments. His presence immediately elevated the formality of the situation, and several personnel straightened their postures as he approached the requisition counter. His weathered face bore the expression of someone accustomed to resolving complex situations that had escalated beyond normal procedures. Colonel, the lieutenant colonel briefed him quickly on the situation, the technical assessments, safety concerns, and financial implications that had been discussed. Multiple experts have expressed serious reservations about this equipment request based on documented qualification standards and safety protocols. The colonel listened carefully before turning his attention to Lieutenant Ramirez with a measured assessment of someone evaluating potential risks to his command. "Lieutenant, I need to understand something here." He consulted a tablet that had been provided by one of his staff members. "Your service record shows competent performance with standard equipment, but nothing that would indicate preparation for systems requiring specialized training. Multiple technical experts have raised legitimate concerns about safety and appropriateness." He paused deliberately. "What specific experience or training makes you believe you can safely and effectively use equipment that challenges personnel with years of advanced preparation?" The Master Sergeant instructor from the marksmanship facility decided to provide additional context that seemed relevant to the colonel's assessment. "Sir, in my 12 years of instruction, I have never encountered a situation where someone insisted on advanced equipment without demonstrating prerequisite skills through established training programs." He gestured toward Lieutenant Ramirez. "The progression from basic to advanced marksmanship follows specific protocols designed to ensure safety and effectiveness. Bypassing those protocols typically results in failure and potential injury." A chief warrant officer who specialized in equipment procurement had joined the discussion after learning about the unusual financial liability aspects of the request. "Colonel, that weapon system represents one of our most expensive precision instruments. The total replacement cost, including scope, accessories, and specialized ammunition, exceeds $60,000. He consulted his documentation. Standard procurement procedures require demonstrated proficiency and operational justification for equipment at this cost level. The range safety officer who had provided earlier incident statistics decided to share additional information that seemed directly relevant to command decision-making. "Sir, our safety protocols specifically require progressive qualification before personnel can access advanced weapon systems. These requirements exist because we have documented evidence that unprepared personnel create unacceptable risks to themselves and others." He flipped through several pages of reports. Waiving these protocols would set a precedent that could compromise safety standards across the entire installation. One of the junior officers who had been observing since the beginning decided to voice what appeared to be a growing concern among the assembled personnel. "Colonel, respectfully, the lieutenant's insistence on this equipment, despite unanimous expert opposition, suggests either a fundamental misunderstanding of her capabilities or disregard for established safety protocols." His companion nodded in agreement. "Either situation represents a potential risk to unit cohesion and operational effectiveness." The ballistics expert approached with additional technical documentation that seemed to reinforce the collective assessment of inappropriateness. "Sir, that weapon system requires understanding of atmospheric conditions, ballistic coefficients, and advanced mathematical calculations that typically require months of specialized education." He gestured toward the equipment with obvious respect for its complexity. Even experienced marksmen struggle with a learning curve when transitioning to systems of this sophistication. A sergeant major who had been consulted about training protocols arrived with documentation showing qualification requirements and prerequisite courses. "Colonel, standard progression to advanced marksmanship systems requires completion of intermediate precision courses, demonstrated proficiency at multiple skill levels, and physical conditioning assessments." He consulted his papers briefly. "Lieutenant Ramirez has not completed any of the prerequisite training that would normally qualify someone for equipment of this type." The weapons specialist, who had provided extensive technical details throughout the discussion, approached with what appeared to be manufacturer specifications and operational requirements. "Sir, the weapon manufacturer specifically recommends minimum training standards before operational use. These recommendations exist because improper use can result in equipment damage, personal injury, and mission failure." She held up several pages of technical documentation. Ignoring manufacturer guidelines could void warranties and create additional financial liability. The colonel had been consulting quietly with other senior personnel who had gathered to observe what had become an unprecedented equipment request situation. The collective expertise present represented multiple decades of experience with advanced weapon systems, and their unanimous assessment had created institutional pressure for resolution that protected both personnel safety and equipment integrity. A master chief who specialized in logistics and supply management decided to contribute perspective about the broader implications of the situation. Colonel, approving equipment requests that exceed documented qualifications sets a precedent that could affect our entire supply management system. Other personnel might interpret this as authorization to request equipment beyond their skill levels. He gestured toward the assembled group. Maintaining standards protects both individual safety and institutional effectiveness. The requisition officer who had been processing the request since the beginning appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the situation that had evolved far beyond normal equipment distribution procedures. "Sir, I have never encountered a situation where someone insisted on equipment despite such comprehensive expert opposition. Standard procedures do not provide guidance for resolving requests that generate this level of technical and safety concern." The lieutenant colonel who had been involved since early in the discussion decided to summarize the collective assessment for the colonel's consideration. "Sir, we have unanimous expert opinion that this equipment request exceeds the lieutenant's documented qualifications, violates established safety protocols, creates significant financial liability, and represents unacceptable risk to personnel and equipment. Multiple departments have expressed concerns about setting precedents that could compromise institutional standards." The atmosphere in the armory had become thick with institutional certainty that Lieutenant Ramirez was demonstrating either dangerous overconfidence or fundamental misunderstanding of military procurement protocols. The assembled expertise and command presence had transformed the initial equipment request into a consultation about maintaining professional standards and operational safety. The colonel prepared to render what appeared to be a definitive assessment of the situation based on comprehensive input from multiple experts and consideration of broader institutional implications. "Lieutenant Ramirez, given the unanimous technical assessment, safety concerns, financial implications, and procedural violations identified here, I need you to provide immediate justification for why this request should be approved despite overwhelming expert opposition." The colonel's demand for immediate justification seemed to settle the matter for everyone present, creating an expectant silence as the assembled personnel waited for Lieutenant Ramirez to either provide unprecedented documentation or acknowledge the impossibility of her position. The weight of institutional authority, technical expertise, and unanimous professional assessment had created what appeared to be an insurmountable barrier to her equipment request. A brigadier general who had been conducting facility inspections entered the armory after noticing the unusual congregation of personnel and senior officers. His presence immediately transformed the atmosphere from institutional consultation to command review, and several officers moved to brief him on the situation that had generated such unprecedented attention from multiple departments. "General," the colonel quickly summarized the equipment request, expert assessments, safety concerns, and procedural violations that had been identified during the extended discussion. "The lieutenant has insisted on advanced equipment despite lacking documented qualifications, ignoring safety protocols, and disregarding unanimous expert opinion about inappropriateness of her request." The general listened carefully while studying Lieutenant Ramirez with the measured assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating complex personnel situations. A command sergeant major who accompanied the general approached the requisition counter with obvious authority and extensive experience in resolving equipment disputes. His presence carried the weight of someone who had witnessed decades of personnel attempting to acquire equipment beyond their documented capabilities, and his expression suggested familiarity with situations requiring command intervention. "Lieutenant," the command sergeant major addressed her directly, "I have been involved in military equipment distribution for 26 years. In my experience, Personnel who persist in requesting equipment despite expert opposition usually demonstrate either dangerous overconfidence or fundamental misunderstanding of military standards. He paused to study her carefully. Your insistence on this equipment, despite overwhelming professional assessment, suggests serious judgment issues that could affect your career and unit effectiveness. The general had been consulting with the colonel and other senior personnel while reviewing documentation that had been provided about the situation. Multiple experts, safety protocols, financial liability, and procedural violations represented a comprehensive case against approving the equipment request that seemed impossible to overcome through normal justification processes. A lieutenant colonel from the training command who had been summoned to provide additional expert assessment arrived with comprehensive documentation about qualification requirements and training prerequisites. General, advanced marksmanship qualification requires minimum 18 months of progressive training, demonstrated proficiency at multiple levels, and specialized instruction that costs approximately $25,000 per student. He consulted his documentation. Lieutenant Ramirez has completed none of the prerequisite training that would normally qualify someone for equipment of this sophistication. The Master Sergeant instructor from the marksmanship facility decided to provide additional context about the rarity of situations requiring such extensive command consultation. Sir, in 12 years of instruction, I have never encountered someone who insisted on advanced equipment while lacking basic prerequisites. The progression protocols exist because we have documented evidence that unprepared personnel create unacceptable risks. He gestured toward the assembled expertise. This level of expert opposition is unprecedented in my experience. A chief warrant officer who specialized in advanced weapons systems maintenance approached with technical specifications that seemed to reinforce every concern that had been raised during the extended discussion. General, that weapon configuration requires maintenance procedures, specialized tools, and technical knowledge that few personnel possess. Even if someone could physically operate the system, the support requirements would strain our maintenance capabilities. He held up several pages of technical documentation. Improper handling could result in damage requiring manufacturer repair at costs exceeding $15,000. The weapons specialist who had provided extensive technical details throughout the discussion approached the general with what appeared to be definitive documentation about operational requirements. Sir, the manufacturer specifications explicitly state that this weapon system should only be operated by personnel who have completed certified training programs and demonstrated proficiency through standardized testing. She consulted her papers. Violating these guidelines could void warranties, create liability issues, and compromise safety standards. The Brigadier General had been observing Lieutenant Ramirez throughout the briefings and expert consultations, studying her composure in the face of mounting institutional pressure and unanimous professional opposition. Her unwavering calm in a situation that would normally cause most personnel to reconsider their position seemed to intrigue rather than concern him, suggesting experience with high-pressure situations that was not evident in her service record. A master chief from the special operations community who had been conducting equipment evaluations in the facility approached after learning about the unusual equipment request. General, advanced precision systems like the one being requested are typically reserved for personnel with specialized mission requirements and extensive training backgrounds. He gestured toward Lieutenant Ramirez. Standard distribution protocols exist to ensure equipment reaches qualified personnel who can use it effectively and safely. The range safety officer who had provided incident statistics earlier decided to share additional information that seemed relevant to command decision-making. Sir, waiving established safety protocols for this equipment request would create precedent that could affect safety standards across multiple installations. Other personnel might interpret approval as authorization to bypass qualification requirements. He consulted his documentation. Maintaining standards protects both individual safety and institutional integrity. The colonel who had been managing the situation from the beginning approached the general with what appeared to be comprehensive documentation of the entire consultation process. Sir, we have exhausted all standard procedures for evaluating this equipment request. Multiple experts have provided technical assessments. Safety concerns have been documented. Financial liability has been established, and procedural violations have been identified. He gestured toward the assembled personnel. The unanimous professional assessment indicates approval would violate multiple institutional standards. The command sergeant major decided to offer what seemed like final guidance based on his extensive experience with similar situations. Lieutenant, I have seen this exact scenario dozens of times throughout my career. Personnel who believe their confidence compensates for lack of training and documentation. The outcome is always the same: failure, embarrassment, and sometimes serious consequences for career progression. He looked directly at her with obvious concern. Your persistence despite overwhelming expert opposition suggests you may not understand the implications of your position. The atmosphere in the armory had reached a crescendo of institutional certainty that Lieutenant Ramirez was demonstrating dangerous judgment that required command intervention to protect both her safety and institutional standards. The assembled expertise, command presence, and comprehensive assessment had created overwhelming pressure for resolution that maintained professional protocols and operational effectiveness. The Brigadier General prepared to render what appeared to be a definitive command decision based on comprehensive expert consultation and consideration of broader institutional implications that extended far beyond a single equipment request. The Brigadier General stood before Lieutenant Ramirez with the measured assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating personnel decisions that could affect entire units and operational outcomes. The assembled expertise, institutional protocols, and comprehensive opposition had created what appeared to be an insurmountable case against approving her equipment request, yet something about her unwavering composure seemed to intrigue him rather than frustrate him. Lieutenant Ramirez, the general began with the authority of someone accustomed to rendering decisions that carried significant consequences. I have listened to comprehensive expert testimony, reviewed safety protocols, considered financial implications, and evaluated institutional standards. Every professional assessment indicates your equipment request exceeds documented qualifications and violates established procedures. He paused to study her carefully. However, your persistence in the face of overwhelming opposition suggests either dangerous overconfidence or information not currently available to this assessment. The command sergeant major, who had witnessed decades of similar situations, positioned himself where he could observe both the general's assessment and Lieutenant Ramirez's response. His experience with personnel who demonstrated unusual confidence in high-pressure situations had taught him to recognize when something was not entirely as it appeared, though the current evidence seemed overwhelmingly clear about her lack of qualifications. A senior master sergeant from the Special Operations Liaison Office had arrived after hearing about the unusual equipment request that had generated unprecedented attention from multiple command levels. His presence carried the weight of someone familiar with personnel who operated outside normal qualification frameworks, and his interest in the situation seemed different from the technical experts who had provided earlier assessments. General, the colonel who had been managing the situation approached with what appeared to be final documentation. We have established that Lieutenant Ramirez lacks prerequisite training, has not completed qualification requirements, and is requesting equipment that exceeds safety protocols. Multiple experts have expressed concerns about precedent, liability, and operational effectiveness. He gestured toward the assembled personnel. Standard procedures indicate this request should be denied to maintain institutional integrity. The Master Sergeant Instructor from the marksmanship facility decided to provide one final technical assessment for the General's consideration. Sir, that weapon system represents the absolute pinnacle of precision rifle technology. In 12 years of instruction, I have qualified fewer than 50 personnel on systems of this sophistication. He looked directly at Lieutenant Ramirez with obvious puzzlement. Her insistence on equipment that challenges our most experienced marksmen suggests either fundamental misunderstanding of the requirements or access to training not documented in her official record. The weapons specialist, who had provided extensive technical details throughout the discussion, approached with manufacturer documentation that seemed to offer additional perspective about operational requirements. General, the technical specifications for this system include recommendations for personnel selection based on demonstrated capabilities and specialized training. She consulted her papers carefully. However, these recommendations also acknowledge that some personnel may possess qualifications through alternative training programs or specialized assignments not reflected in standard military records. The Brigadier General had been studying Lieutenant Ramirez with increasing interest as the technical consultations continued around them. Her composure under institutional pressure, combined with her persistent confidence in requesting equipment that challenged the most qualified personnel, suggested experience with high-stakes situations that was not evident in her documented service history. A Master Chief from the Naval Special Warfare community, who had been observing the situation, approached with obvious curiosity about the unprecedented nature of the equipment request and command consultation. General, advanced precision systems are typically distributed through specialized channels to personnel with verified capabilities and mission requirements. He paused thoughtfully. However, certain operational assignments may not be fully reflected in standard personnel records due to classification requirements or specialized program participation. The range safety officer, who had provided comprehensive incident statistics earlier, decided to offer additional context that seemed relevant to the general's assessment. Sir, our safety protocols are designed to protect personnel who lack documented training and experience. However, these protocols also include provisions for personnel with specialized backgrounds or alternative qualification pathways. He consulted his documentation. The key factor is verified capability rather than specific training program completion. The lieutenant colonel from Training Command, who had briefed the general earlier on qualification requirements, approached with what appeared to be additional information about alternative certification processes. Sir, while Lieutenant Ramirez has not completed our standard qualification programs, military personnel sometimes receive specialized training through other services, joint programs, or classified assignments that may not appear in normal records. He looked toward Lieutenant Ramirez with growing curiosity. Such training could potentially justify equipment requests that seem inappropriate based on standard documentation. The general had been consulting quietly with the command sergeant major and other senior personnel while the technical discussions continued. The combination of overwhelming expert opposition and her unwavering confidence had created an unusual situation that seemed to require investigation beyond standard equipment request procedures. A chief warrant officer who specialized in personnel assignments and specialized programs had been summoned to provide additional perspective about alternative training pathways that might explain the disconnect between documented qualifications and demonstrated confidence. General, certain military assignments involve training and experience that may not be reflected in standard personnel files due to operational security requirements or program classification. He approached with obvious interest in resolving the apparent contradiction. The Master Sergeant Instructor from the Marksmanship Facility decided to share an observation that had been growing throughout the extended consultation. Sir, Lieutenant Ramirez's composure under this level of institutional pressure is unusual for someone lacking advanced training. Most personnel would have modified their request or provided additional justification by now. Her persistence suggests either dangerous overconfidence or access to capabilities not evident in her documented record. The weapons specialist, who had been involved since the beginning of the discussion, approached the general with what appeared to be a new perspective based on extended observation. General, while her request initially seemed inappropriate based on standard qualifications, her technical knowledge during our discussions has been more sophisticated than typically demonstrated by personnel lacking advanced training. She paused thoughtfully. Her familiarity with system specifications suggests exposure to equipment beyond what her record would indicate. The atmosphere in the armory had begun to shift subtly from institutional certainty about inappropriateness to curiosity about the disconnect between documented qualifications and demonstrated confidence. The general's interest in investigating rather than simply denying had created space for questions about information that might not be immediately apparent through standard assessment procedures. The brigadier general prepared to pursue a line of inquiry that could potentially resolve the apparent contradiction between overwhelming expert assessment and the lieutenant's unwavering confidence in her equipment request. The brigadier general's shift from immediate denial to investigative curiosity had created a palpable change in the atmosphere surrounding the equipment request consultation. His decades of experience with personnel who operated in specialized environments had taught him to recognize when situations contained elements not immediately apparent through standard assessment procedures, and Lieutenant Ramirez's unwavering confidence despite overwhelming opposition had triggered his investigative instincts. "Lieutenant," the general addressed her directly with the measured tone of someone seeking to understand rather than simply deny, "your persistence in requesting equipment that every expert present considers inappropriate for your documented qualifications suggests either remarkable overconfidence or access to training and experience not reflected in your standard military record." He paused thoughtfully. "Before I render a decision on this request, I need you to provide any additional information about your background that might be relevant to this assessment." The command sergeant major, who had been observing the situation with growing interest, positioned himself where he could better evaluate Lieutenant Ramirez's response to the general's inquiry. His extensive experience with personnel from specialized programs had taught him that certain military assignments created capabilities that were not always evident through conventional documentation, and her composure under institutional pressure suggested familiarity with high-stakes environments. A colonel from the Joint Special Operations Command who had been conducting coordination meetings in the facility approached after learning about the unusual equipment request and general-level consultation. His presence carried the authority of someone familiar with personnel who operated outside standard qualification frameworks, and his interest in the situation seemed to reflect recognition that certain circumstances required investigation beyond normal procedures. "General," the weapons specialist who had provided extensive technical assessments throughout the discussion approached with what appeared to be a different perspective based on extended observation. "During our consultation, Lieutenant Ramirez has demonstrated technical knowledge about system specifications that exceeds what personnel typically possess without direct experience. Her familiarity with ballistic characteristics, maintenance requirements, and operational parameters suggests exposure to advanced equipment that is not evident in her documented training history." The master sergeant instructor from the marksmanship facility decided to share observations that had been developing throughout the extended consultation process. "Sir, while Lieutenant Ramirez lacks standard qualification documentation, her technical discussions have revealed understanding of precision shooting concepts that typically require years of specialized instruction." He gestured toward her with growing curiosity. Her knowledge of atmospheric compensation, ballistic coefficients, and range estimation techniques suggests practical experience that exceeds her documented record. A senior master sergeant from the Special Operations Liaison Office approached the general with obvious interest in resolving the apparent contradiction between documented qualifications and demonstrated confidence. "Sir, certain military assignments involve training and operational experience that may not appear in standard personnel files due to classification requirements or program security protocols." He consulted a tablet briefly. Some specialized programs maintain separate documentation systems that are not accessible through normal personnel record reviews. The general had been studying Lieutenant Ramirez with increasing attention as the technical experts provided observations about her knowledge and composure that seemed inconsistent with someone lacking advanced training. Her responses to technical questions, combined with her persistence despite institutional pressure, suggested familiarity with situations that required confidence in the face of skepticism from conventional military personnel. A chief warrant officer who specialized in personnel security and classified program management had been summoned to provide perspective about alternative documentation systems that might explain the disconnect between standard records and demonstrated capabilities. "General," Personnel involved in certain specialized assignments may have training records maintained through separate channels that are not immediately accessible for standard equipment requests. He approached with obvious familiarity with such situations. Verification of such backgrounds typically requires specific inquiry through appropriate security channels. The lieutenant colonel from training command who had provided earlier assessments about qualification requirements approached with what appeared to be additional consideration about alternative pathways. Sir, while our standard programs provide excellent preparation for advanced equipment, the military also conducts specialized training through joint programs, interagency assignments, and classified instruction that may not be reflected in conventional documentation. He looked toward Lieutenant Ramirez with growing interest. Such training could potentially justify equipment requests that appear inappropriate through standard assessment. The range safety officer who had been involved since the beginning of the consultation decided to offer perspective that reflected changing understanding of the situation. General, our safety protocols are designed to protect personnel lacking documented qualifications, but they also acknowledge that some military personnel may possess capabilities through alternative training pathways. He consulted his documentation. The key consideration is verified capability rather than specific program completion, though verification methods may require specialized inquiry procedures. A Master Chief from the Naval Special Warfare community, who had been observing the developing consultation, approached with obvious recognition that the situation had evolved beyond standard equipment request procedures. Sir, advanced precision systems are sometimes distributed to personnel with specialized mission requirements that may not be evident through conventional documentation review. He paused thoughtfully. Certain operational backgrounds create familiarity with equipment and procedures that exceed what standard military records would indicate. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command had been consulting quietly with other senior personnel while observing Lieutenant Ramirez's responses to the developing inquiry. Her composure under investigation, combined with technical knowledge that seemed inconsistent with her documented background, suggested involvement in programs that maintained operational security through limited documentation disclosure. The weapons specialist who had been providing technical assessments throughout the consultation approached the general with what appeared to be a significant observation about Lieutenant Ramirez's responses to technical inquiries. Sir, during our discussions about system specifications, she has demonstrated familiarity with equipment characteristics that personnel typically acquire only through direct operational use. Her knowledge of maintenance procedures, ammunition requirements, and performance parameters suggests hands-on experience that exceeds theoretical instruction. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed from institutional opposition to investigative curiosity as senior personnel recognized that the situation contained elements requiring exploration beyond standard equipment request procedures. The general's decision to investigate rather than deny had created space for questions about background information that might not be immediately accessible through conventional documentation systems. The brigadier general prepared to pursue specific inquiries about Lieutenant Ramirez's background that might resolve the apparent contradiction between documented qualifications and demonstrated confidence. Recognizing that certain military assignments created capabilities that required specialized verification procedures to confirm. The brigadier general's investigation had transformed the equipment request consultation into something resembling a security review, as multiple senior personnel recognized that Lieutenant Ramirez's demonstrated knowledge and unwavering confidence suggested involvement in programs that operated outside conventional documentation systems. Her technical familiarity with advanced equipment, combined with composure under institutional pressure, had created compelling evidence that her background contained elements not immediately apparent through standard record review. Lieutenant Ramirez, the general addressed her with the focused attention of someone pursuing specific information. I need you to provide details about any specialized training, alternative assignments, or classified programs that might explain your familiarity with equipment systems that typically require years of advanced instruction. Your technical knowledge during this consultation has exceeded what personnel normally demonstrate without direct operational experience. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command approached with obvious recognition that the developing investigation required specific expertise about classified program verification procedures. General, certain specialized assignments maintain operational security through compartmentalized documentation that requires specific clearance levels and inquiry procedures to access. He consulted a secure tablet that had been provided by his administrative staff. Standard personnel record reviews may not reveal training or experience acquired through such programs. A master chief from the special operations community who had been observing Lieutenant Ramirez with growing interest decided to share perspective based on decades of experience with personnel who possess capabilities not evident through conventional assessment. Sir, her responses to technical questions about ballistic performance, environmental compensation, and equipment maintenance suggest practical experience that exceeds theoretical instruction. He paused thoughtfully. Such familiarity typically indicates operational deployment with advanced systems rather than classroom training. The weapons specialist who had been providing technical assessments throughout the consultation approached the general with what appeared to be significant observations about Lieutenant Ramirez's knowledge of system specifications. General, during our discussions, she has demonstrated understanding of ammunition hand-loading procedures, scope calibration techniques, and maintenance protocols that personnel typically acquire only through extended operational use. Her familiarity with manufacturer specifications and performance characteristics suggests direct experience with equipment at levels not indicated by her documented record. The command sergeant major, who had been evaluating the situation with increasing curiosity, positioned himself where he could better observe Lieutenant Ramirez's responses to the developing security inquiry. His extensive experience with personnel from specialized programs had taught him to recognize when situations involved classified assignments that created capabilities beyond what standard documentation would indicate, and her composure suggested familiarity with security reviews. A senior intelligence officer who had been conducting liaison activities in the facility approached after learning about the unusual equipment request and general-level investigation. His presence carried the authority of someone familiar with personnel who operated in classified environments, and his interest in the consultation seemed to reflect recognition that certain circumstances required investigation through specialized channels rather than standard procedures. General, the master sergeant instructor from the marksmanship facility, decided to provide additional observations that had been developing throughout the extended consultation. Lieutenant Ramirez has demonstrated knowledge of precision shooting techniques that typically require years of specialized instruction and practical application. Her understanding of atmospheric effects, target engagement procedures, and equipment limitations suggests operational experience that exceeds her documented training history. The lieutenant colonel from Training Command, who had been involved since early in the consultation, approached with what appeared to be additional consideration about the implications of her demonstrated knowledge. Sir, while our standard qualification programs provide excellent preparation, the technical expertise she has displayed during this consultation suggests exposure to instruction and experience typically available only through specialized programs or classified assignments. He looked toward Lieutenant Ramirez with obvious curiosity about her background. The general had been consulting with the intelligence officer and other senior personnel, while the technical experts continued providing observations about inconsistencies between documented qualifications and demonstrated capabilities. The developing evidence suggested that Lieutenant Ramirez possessed training and experience that required verification through channels beyond standard personnel record review, indicating potential involvement in classified programs. A chief warrant officer who specialized in special access program management approached with obvious familiarity with situations requiring investigation beyond conventional documentation systems. General, personnel involved in certain classified assignments may have capabilities and experience that are not reflected in standard military records due to operational security requirements. He consulted secure documentation briefly. Verification of such backgrounds typically requires specific inquiry through appropriate intelligence channels and security protocols. The range safety officer who had been providing safety assessments throughout the consultation decided to offer perspective about the changing nature of their evaluation. Sir, while our initial assessment focused on documented qualifications, the technical knowledge Lieutenant Ramirez has demonstrated suggests capabilities that may have been acquired through alternative training pathways. He paused thoughtfully. Our safety protocols acknowledge that personnel with verified specialized experience may warrant different consideration than those lacking documented preparation. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command had been conducting secure communications with other agencies while observing the developing investigation. His expression suggested that inquiries about Lieutenant Ramirez's background were yielding information that might explain the disconnect between her documented record and demonstrated expertise, though such information required careful verification through appropriate security channels. A senior master sergeant from the Special Operations Liaison Office approached the general with what appeared to be significant information about alternative documentation systems that might contain details about Lieutenant Ramirez's background. Sir, certain specialized programs maintain personnel records through separate systems that require specific clearance levels and inquiry procedures to access. He consulted secure documentation. Such programs often involve training and operational experience that exceeds what conventional military records would indicate. The weapons specialist who had been observing Lieutenant Ramirez throughout the consultation approached with additional observations about her familiarity with advanced equipment systems. General, her knowledge of system modifications, performance optimization, and operational employment techniques suggests experience with equipment at levels typically reserved for highly specialized personnel. She paused meaningfully. Such expertise normally indicates involvement in programs that operate outside standard military training frameworks. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed completely from initial skepticism to intensive investigation as senior personnel recognized that Lieutenant Ramirez's background likely contained classified elements that required specialized verification procedures to confirm. The general's decision to pursue security-level inquiry had created recognition that her equipment request might be justified through channels not immediately accessible through conventional assessment. The Brigadier General prepared to initiate formal inquiry procedures through classified channels that might reveal information about Lieutenant Ramirez's background sufficient to resolve the apparent contradiction between documented qualifications and demonstrated expertise, recognizing that certain military assignments created capabilities that required specialized verification to confirm. The formal security inquiry initiated by the Brigadier General had created an atmosphere of intense anticipation as multiple senior personnel awaited results that might explain the dramatic disconnect between Lieutenant Ramirez's documented qualifications and her demonstrated expertise with advanced weapon systems. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command had been conducting secure communications through classified channels, and his expression suggested that the investigation was yielding significant information about her background. General, the intelligence officer who had been coordinating verification procedures approached with secure documentation that appeared to contain definitive information about Lieutenant Ramirez's background and specialized training history. His expression carried the weight of someone who had discovered information that would fundamentally change the assessment of her equipment request and capabilities. The secure inquiry has revealed classified assignment history that explains Lieutenant Ramirez's technical knowledge and confidence with advanced equipment systems. He consulted his documentation carefully before continuing. Her standard military record reflects only conventional assignments, but specialized program documentation indicates extensive training and operational experience with precision systems that exceed what our initial assessment considered. A senior master sergeant from the Special Access Program Office approached with additional classified documentation that seemed to provide comprehensive details about Lieutenant Ramirez's actual qualifications and operational background. General, The specialized program records indicate training completion and operational deployment history that would justify equipment requests significantly more advanced than what she has requested today. He paused meaningfully. Her documented capabilities through classified channels exceed the qualifications of most personnel who routinely receive approval for such equipment. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command had completed his secure communications and approached the general with what appeared to be definitive information about Lieutenant Ramirez's background and specialized assignment history. Sir, the inquiry through classified channels has confirmed extensive training and operational experience that explains both her technical knowledge and confidence in requesting advanced equipment. He consulted secure documentation briefly. Her actual qualifications justify equipment requests that far exceed what she has asked for today. The weapons specialist who had been providing technical assessments throughout the consultation approached with obvious recognition that the developing information fundamentally changed their evaluation of Lieutenant Ramirez's capabilities and equipment request appropriateness. General, if the classified documentation confirms operational experience with advanced precision systems, then her technical knowledge and equipment requests become not only appropriate, but potentially modest given her actual qualifications. The Master Sergeant Instructor from the marksmanship facility, who had questioned her qualifications throughout the consultation, approached with what appeared to be growing understanding of the situation that had unfolded during their extended assessment. Sir, if Lieutenant Ramirez possesses the training and operational experience indicated by the classified inquiry, then her equipment request represents standard procedure rather than inappropriate overreach. He looked toward her with obvious recognition that his earlier assessment had been based on incomplete information. The Brigadier General had been reviewing the classified documentation provided by the intelligence officer and Joint Special Operations personnel, and his expression suggested that the revealed information about Lieutenant Ramirez's background was both comprehensive and significant. The documentation appeared to contain details about specialized training and operational assignments that explained every aspect of her demonstrated knowledge and unwavering confidence. A command sergeant major from the Special Operations community approached after being briefed on the results of the classified inquiry into Lieutenant Ramirez's background and assignment history. General, personnel with the training and operational experience indicated by this documentation typically receive expedited approval for equipment requests without the level of scrutiny we have applied today. He paused thoughtfully. Her patience during our extensive consultation suggests familiarity with security procedures and classification protocols. The Chief Warrant Officer, who specialized in Special Access Program Management, approached with additional perspective about the implications of the revealed information for equipment request procedures and institutional protocols. Sir, personnel with classified assignment histories often experience delays and additional scrutiny when their standard records do not reflect their actual qualifications. He consulted his documentation. Specialized programs maintain operational security through compartmentalized records that may not be immediately accessible for routine equipment requests. The lieutenant colonel from Training Command, who had provided assessments about qualification requirements, approached with obvious recognition that the classified information fundamentally changed their evaluation of Lieutenant Ramirez's preparedness for advanced equipment systems. General, if the specialized program documentation confirms the training and experience levels indicated, then Lieutenant Ramirez exceeds the qualification standards we typically require for equipment of this sophistication. He looked toward her with growing respect. The range safety officer, who had provided comprehensive safety assessments throughout the consultation, approached with recognition that the revealed information addressed every concern that had been raised during their extended evaluation process. Sir, personnel with the training background indicated by the classified documentation typically demonstrate exactly the type of technical knowledge and operational confidence that Lieutenant Ramirez has displayed throughout our consultation today. The intelligence officer who had coordinated the classified inquiry approached the general with what appeared to be additional significant information about Lieutenant Ramirez's operational background and specialized qualifications that exceeded what had been initially revealed through the security review process. General, the classified documentation indicates that Lieutenant Ramirez operates under a specialized call sign designation that reflects her advanced capabilities and operational achievements in precision marksmanship applications. He consulted his secure documentation carefully. The call sign associated with her classified assignments is Black Falcon, which indicates qualification levels and operational experience that significantly exceed standard military marksmanship programs. The revelation of the Black Falcon call sign created immediate and profound recognition among the senior personnel present, as that designation carried legendary status within specialized military communities and indicated capabilities that placed Lieutenant Ramirez among the most elite precision marksmen in military service. The call sign was associated with operational achievements and expertise that explained not only her equipment request, but her unwavering confidence despite institutional opposition. A Master Chief from the Naval Special Warfare community who recognized the significance of the Black Falcon designation approached with obvious respect and recognition of the extraordinary capabilities that call sign represented within specialized military circles. General, Black Falcon is a designation reserved for personnel with exceptional operational achievements and capabilities that exceed standard qualification frameworks. He paused with obvious recognition of her elite status. Personnel operating under that call sign typically receive immediate approval for any equipment they request without question or delay. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed instantly from investigation to recognition as the assembled personnel realized they had been questioning the equipment request of someone whose actual qualifications and operational achievements placed her among the most elite specialists in military service, and whose legendary call sign commanded immediate respect and deference within specialized communities. The Brigadier General prepared to address Lieutenant Ramirez with the recognition and respect appropriate for someone whose Black Falcon designation indicated capabilities and achievements that exceeded what most military personnel could comprehend or approach during their entire careers. The revelation of the Black Falcon call sign had created an immediate and profound transformation in the armory atmosphere, as the assembled personnel struggled to reconcile their initial skepticism with the reality that they had been questioning the equipment request of one of the most legendary precision marksmen in military service. The silence that followed the intelligence officer's disclosure carried the weight of institutional recognition that their comprehensive opposition had been directed towards someone whose capabilities exceeded what most of them could comprehend. Lieutenant Ramirez, the Brigadier General, addressed her with the respect and deference appropriate for someone whose Black Falcon designation commanded immediate recognition within specialized military communities. I need to apologize on behalf of everyone present for the scrutiny and opposition you have encountered today. Your call sign designation indicates capabilities and operational achievements that place you among the most elite specialists in military service. The requisition officer who had initiated the extended consultation by questioning her qualifications approached with obvious embarrassment and recognition that his standard procedures had been entirely inappropriate for someone of her documented expertise and legendary status. Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the delays and additional requirements I imposed on your equipment request. The Black Falcon designation indicates qualifications that justify immediate approval for any equipment you require without question or procedural obstacles. The Master Sergeant Instructor from the marksmanship facility who had questioned her readiness for advanced equipment throughout the consultation approached with obvious humility and recognition that his assessment had been based on fundamentally incomplete information about her actual capabilities. Lieutenant Ramirez, I apologize for suggesting you lack qualifications for advanced systems. The Black Falcon call sign represents achievements in precision marksmanship that exceed what I teach in our most advanced programs. Your expertise surpasses anything we encounter through standard military training frameworks. The weapons specialist who had provided extensive technical concerns about her ability to handle advanced equipment approached with recognition that her earlier assessments had been entirely misplaced given the revealed information about Lieutenant Ramirez's actual qualifications and operational background. Ma'am, I apologize for questioning your technical knowledge and equipment handling capabilities. Personnel operating under the Black Falcon designation possess expertise that exceeds manufacturer specifications and standard operational parameters. Your equipment request represents routine procedure rather than inappropriate overreach. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command who had participated in the investigation that revealed her true identity approached with obvious respect for the legendary status that the Black Falcon call sign carried within specialized military circles. Lieutenant Ramirez, the Black Falcon designation is recognized throughout special operations communities as indicating capabilities that place you among the most elite precision specialists in military service. Your patience during our extended consultation demonstrates professionalism that matches your operational reputation. The command sergeant major who had questioned her judgment and persistence throughout the consultation approached with recognition that his concerns about overconfidence had been entirely misplaced given her documented achievements and elite status within specialized military communities. Ma'am, I apologize for suggesting your persistence indicated poor judgment. Personnel with Black Falcon designation typically demonstrate exactly the type of confidence and technical knowledge you have displayed throughout our consultation today. The range safety officer who had provided comprehensive safety concerns about her equipment request approached with obvious recognition that his protocols had been inappropriate for someone whose qualifications exceeded standard safety frameworks and operational parameters. Lieutenant Ramirez, I apologize for applying standard safety restrictions to your equipment request. The Black Falcon designation indicates training and operational experience that surpasses our normal safety protocols and qualification requirements. A senior master sergeant from the Special Operations Liaison Office approached with obvious respect for the legendary capabilities that the Black Falcon call sign represented within elite military communities and recognition of the extraordinary operational achievements associated with that designation. Ma'am, Black Falcon status indicates precision marksmanship capabilities that are legendary within specialized military circles. Your operational achievements under that call sign exceed what most personnel accomplish during entire military careers. The lieutenant colonel from Training Command who had emphasized her lack of prerequisite qualifications throughout the consultation approached with recognition that his standard training requirements were entirely inadequate measures for someone whose actual capabilities placed her among the most elite specialists in military service. Lieutenant Ramirez, I apologize for suggesting you lacked adequate preparation for advanced equipment. The Black Falcon designation indicates training and operational experience that exceeds our most advanced qualification programs. The intelligence officer who had coordinated the classified inquiry that revealed her true identity approached with additional information about the operational significance and legendary status of the Black Falcon call sign within specialized military communities. General, the Black Falcon designation is associated with operational achievements and precision marksmanship capabilities that have become legendary within intelligence and special operations circles. Personnel operating under that call sign typically receive immediate deference and support for any equipment or operational requirements they identify. The Chief Warrant Officer who specialized in Special Access Program Management approached with recognition that Lieutenant Ramirez's patience during their extended consultation demonstrated the professionalism and operational security awareness expected from personnel with her level of classification and specialized assignment history. Ma'am, your handling of our security review process demonstrates the professionalism associated with Black Falcon designation. Personnel with your classification levels typically encounter exactly the type of scrutiny we apply today when their standard records do not reflect their actual capabilities. The Master Chief from the Naval Special Warfare community, who had recognized the significance of the Black Falcon call sign, approached with obvious respect for the elite status and operational achievements that designation represented within specialized military circles. Lieutenant Ramirez, the Black Falcon call sign, commands immediate recognition and respect throughout special operations communities. Your operational achievements under that designation have created a reputation that exceeds what most personnel achieve during distinguished military careers. The weapons specialist who had been involved since the beginning of the consultation approached with recognition that Lieutenant Ramirez's technical knowledge throughout their discussions had actually demonstrated exactly the type of expertise expected from someone with Black Falcon designation and elite operational background. Ma'am, reviewing our technical discussions with knowledge of your actual qualifications, your expertise was evident throughout our consultation. The Black Falcon designation explains the advanced technical knowledge you demonstrated despite our initial skepticism about your documented record. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed completely from institutional opposition to collective recognition and respect as the assembled personnel realized they had witnessed an extraordinary demonstration of professionalism from someone whose legendary capabilities and operational achievements placed her among the most elite specialists in military service. The Brigadier General prepared to ensure that Lieutenant Ramirez received not only immediate approval for her equipment request, but also the institutional respect and support appropriate for someone whose Black Falcon designation commanded recognition throughout specialized military communities worldwide. The complete transformation of institutional recognition had created an atmosphere of profound respect and immediate action as the assembled personnel worked to ensure that Lieutenant Ramirez received not only approval for her equipment request, but also the elite-level support and deference appropriate for someone whose Black Falcon designation commanded legendary status throughout specialized military communities worldwide. The requisition officer who had initially questioned her qualifications moved with unprecedented efficiency to complete her equipment request, ensuring that every specification she had originally requested was approved without modification or delay. Ma'am, your equipment will be prepared immediately with priority processing and specialized configuration according to your exact specifications. He worked quickly through documentation that had been expedited through command channels. The Black Falcon designation authorizes immediate access to any equipment or modifications you require for operational effectiveness. The weapons specialist who had provided extensive technical concerns throughout the consultation now approached with offers of additional support and specialized equipment that exceeded her original request parameters. Lieutenant Ramirez, given your Black Falcon status, we can provide enhanced modifications and specialized accessories that are typically reserved for the most elite operational requirements. She consulted advanced equipment catalogs that had been retrieved from secure storage. Your legendary capabilities justify access to prototype systems and specialized configurations not available through standard channels. The Master Sergeant Instructor from the marksmanship facility who had questioned her readiness for advanced equipment approached with recognition that his institution should be seeking her expertise rather than questioning her qualifications. Ma'am, given your Black Falcon designation and legendary operational achievements, we would be honored if you would consider providing instruction or consultation for our most advanced training programs. Your expertise exceeds what our standard curriculum can provide, and our students would benefit immeasurably from your knowledge and experience. The Brigadier General who had conducted the investigation that revealed her true identity approached with formal recognition of her elite status and assurance that institutional procedures would be modified to prevent similar situations from occurring with other personnel possessing specialized qualifications. Lieutenant Ramirez, I am implementing immediate procedural changes to ensure that personnel with classified assignment histories receive appropriate recognition and support without the delays and scrutiny you encountered today. Your professionalism during this consultation has been exemplary and reflects the standards associated with Black Falcon designation. The colonel from Joint Special Operations Command approached with offers of enhanced support and recognition that reflected the institutional respect commanded by her legendary call sign within specialized military circles. Ma'am, The Black Falcon designation indicates capabilities and operational achievements that command immediate deference throughout special operations communities. Any future equipment requests or operational support requirements you identify will receive expedited approval through specialized channels designed for personnel of your elite status. The command sergeant major who had questioned her persistence and judgment throughout the consultation approached with profound recognition of the professional standards and operational excellence that her Black Falcon designation represented within military communities worldwide. Lieutenant Ramirez, your patience and professionalism during our extended consultation demonstrates exactly the type of character and operational discipline associated with Black Falcon status. Your handling of institutional scrutiny while maintaining operational security reflects training and experience that exceeds what most personnel develop during distinguished military careers. The range safety officer who had provided comprehensive safety restrictions throughout the consultation approached with recognition that standard protocols were entirely inappropriate for someone whose capabilities exceeded conventional safety frameworks and qualification parameters. Ma'am, personnel with Black Falcon designation operate beyond standard safety protocols and qualification requirements. Your equipment requests and operational procedures will receive specialized consideration that reflects your elite training and legendary operational achievements. The intelligence officer who had coordinated the classified inquiry that revealed her true identity approached with additional information about institutional recognition and support systems designed specifically for personnel with her level of specialized qualifications and operational background. Lieutenant Ramirez, the Black Falcon designation is recognized throughout intelligence and special operations communities as indicating capabilities that place you among the most elite specialists in military service. Institutional support systems are being activated to ensure you receive appropriate recognition and assistance for any operational requirements you identify. The lieutenant colonel from Training Command, who had emphasized qualification deficiencies throughout the consultation, approached with requests for her expertise and recognition that his programs could benefit significantly from her knowledge and operational experience. Ma'am, given your Black Falcon status and legendary capabilities, we would be honored to establish consulting relationships that could enhance our training effectiveness. Your expertise represents operational excellence that exceeds our current instructional capabilities. The Chief Warrant Officer who specialized in Special Access Program Management approached with assurance that procedural improvements would prevent similar classification-related delays for personnel with specialized backgrounds and elite operational status. Lieutenant Ramirez, your experience today demonstrates the need for enhanced coordination between classified program documentation and standard equipment request procedures. Institutional improvements are being implemented to ensure personnel with your qualifications receive immediate recognition and appropriate support. The Master Chief from the Naval Special Warfare community, who had recognized the significance of the Black Falcon Callsign, approached with expressions of honor at having witnessed her professionalism and operational excellence during the consultation process. Ma'am, encountering personnel with Black Falcon designation represents a rare privilege within military service. Your legendary capabilities and operational achievements command respect throughout specialized communities, and your professionalism today has been exemplary. The weapons specialist who had been involved since the beginning of the consultation approached with final confirmation that Lieutenant Ramirez's equipment had been prepared according to her exact specifications, with additional enhancements appropriate for someone of her elite status and operational requirements. Lieutenant Ramirez, your equipment is ready with specialized configurations that reflect Black Falcon operational standards. The system has been enhanced beyond your original specifications to ensure optimal performance for personnel of your legendary capabilities. The atmosphere in the armory had transformed into one of institutional pride at having encountered someone whose Black Falcon designation represented the absolute pinnacle of precision marksmanship excellence and operational achievement within military service. The assembled personnel recognized they had witnessed extraordinary professionalism from someone whose legendary status commanded respect throughout specialized military communities worldwide. If this story of hidden expertise and professional recognition moved you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Maybe you have witnessed similar situations where someone's true capabilities were revealed after being underestimated, or you know someone who demonstrated quiet strength when others doubted them. The Brigadier General concluded the consultation by ensuring that Lieutenant Ramirez received not only complete approval for her equipment request, but also institutional recognition of her elite status and legendary capabilities that would prevent similar situations from occurring in the future, while establishing her as a respected resource for operational excellence and specialized expertise within their military community.